Well, welcome everyone to a very special episode of the Talking Serverless Podcast. We actually have both co-hosts on today. Yours truly, COO Joshua Proto, and founder of Serverless Guru, Ryan Jones. And Ryan will be our guest today. I'm always really excited when we get to have Ryan for a chat, for a podcast, just because I know we're both actually incredibly busy, and Ryan definitely. So it's always awesome to be able to get some time and, pick your brain about serverless, see what sort of, wisdom you have for the community and just experience. So Ryan, thank you so much for hopping on today.
Yeah, it's good to be here. I'm happy that you're the host, Josh. This will be good.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Now, what is it? I'd love to start off a little bit just for, we always are having new people join the podcast and sort of tune in. And, episodes with you are really great entry points. And so I'd love to, and interested to see also how the story develops, which is, I'd love to hear a little bit about, your story with serverless. How did you get into it? What were you doing beforehand? Did it have anything to do with this? And, sort of where are you going right now? What sort of interesting things are keeping you up at night around serverless?
Yeah. So I have been working on, more like a skunk works project for building serverless applications and making progress on it. We're not fully at a public release on any of that stuff. We're planning on doing internal testing within Serverless Guru, getting all of the developers at the company to use it, try it out, get their feedback. As Alex from the Serverless Guru team likes to say, we got to eat our own dog food a little bit on this. And we're in I would say one of the arguably best positions to build a product like this, because we actually have people on the ground that are world-class people from around the world working at Serverless Guru that do this stuff every day. So if we're going to build a product, we actually have people that can give feedback that almost any other startup wouldn't have that ability to tap into it. And then we also have the client access as well. So I'm super excited about it. It's been, rattling around my head for quite a while. At a high level, it's just going to make the development process of serverless applications easier, smoother, and get to that really exciting point where we do a lot of repetition when we're building things out. And so the idea is, let's skip over some of that and let's get to the cool stuff, the new things. And then any things that we learn, any edge cases, let's rework that back into the platform and then grow it from there. So that's probably like the work product development side. I've been surfing quite a bit. So that's, something that's new in the past, 3.5 months. I've been here in Puerto Rico. I think I've surfed the past 4 days around like 5 p.m. until sunset. And it's been amazing. It's been fantastic. So
Yeah. That sounds rocking. So Ryan, do you just one day decide that you're going to be working on a state-of-the-art skunkworks serverless application, a serverless product, or how did you sort of get to the point of where you're able to, I don't know, clearly if you're building a product in this world of business, you definitely are able to see a need, or even sometimes our most innovative people are able to foresee a need and really be able to sort of catch the market before it's fully matured. And so how did you sort of like get to this point? Was serverless always something that you were interested in, or like what was that moment for you?
Yeah, so specifically for this product, it was rattled around in my head for quite a while. And I believe this is a two-part question, but at least the internal product, it was rattled around my head for a while because I kept building the same things. Like every time that I would get asked by a client to build, some serverless application, I always did the same few steps. And if I didn't have access to those templates, that's part of the reason why Serverless Guru has a gigantic templates repository. It was the precursor to kind of what this product is. And so when I would be asked to build this API and then build this other API and then integrate like a user pool incognito and all these services, and then I would get asked to just keep repeating that process. It was, and I'm sure it's not a unique idea. I'm sure pretty much everyone that works in the space has kind of thought about, why don't you just increase the automation of all of it? And it's been done before, but I think that this is specifically the way that I'm almost like putting my brain into the automation. And so I think that even though there's existing products on the market for it, I think this one will be a little bit more unique in terms of, functionality and also the stuff I mentioned earlier. Getting to the second part of that question, like serverless in general. It was an interesting story because I'll go way back because I don't think I've told this part. So I actually, when I was like 8 years old, I would carry a fishing tackle box to elementary school. So I was the cool kid, the one that carries the fishing tackle box to school.
Oh, definitely.
And yeah, and in that box, I'd get my dad and my parents to basically take me to a beauty supply store, also normal 8-year-old things. And then I would go get a bunch of colored rubber bands and like bobby pins. And then I would put them into the tackle fishing box in a nice colored order with like the bobby pins. And then I would go to school on the playground and I would open it up. And then I would basically sell rubber band bracelets of different colors to people on the playground. And I would sell them for like $1. And kids would come to school, with like a couple dollars from their parents. And so I was able to sell these to kids. And then I was able to use that money to buy like, candy from the gas station. And I had that realization, like that self-awareness really early when I bought like my own candy. And I was like, this is cool. You know what I mean? Like, I just like, this is a very unique thing that I was able to create something, have someone buy it, see value in it, and then get something that I wanted out of that using that. Right. That was probably the real start of all of this. Was the, rubber bands, selling that on the playground. From there, I went into just thinking about like skill wise, like skill acquisition was probably like the main driver. I don't like there's those times where like you're operating, but you don't know the vocabulary about why you're doing what you're doing. And so I like the rubber band bracelet to the pro gaming thing was like, okay, if I do this thing, if I get good at this thing, then something good will come out of that. And so I kind of had that idea. And then when it came to Halo 3, which was like a first person shooter game.
Oh, yeah.
When I was in high school, I was playing it and I was seeing like, this was, I think like pre-Twitch, or it's probably
Definitely
and stuff.
pre-Twitch.
And so I was seeing like the Major League Gaming and all this stuff. And I started going to school and I started trying to build a professional gaming team. And I didn't know how to do this like properly. I should have used the internet to find like teammates, but I just found people in my gym class and I would just say, hey, do you play Halo 3? Great. Let's like form a team. Let's go pro at this. And no one took it as seriously as I took it. And so it didn't fully work out, but I tried to build teams back then as well. And from there, I ended up going, okay, I went to an MLG event. It was super cool, kind of like re-inspired that thing. And then I got into World of Warcraft, and World of Warcraft was just an amazing experience. I played it for years, from sophomore in high school to like graduating, and then eventually turned it into a business. And I was just trying to get better. There was no real like pro World of Warcraft players. There were like Twitch streamers that popped up during that period. But there wasn't really as much money. Like Coca-Cola wasn't sponsoring people at this point, And so I just started getting better at it. And then I saw someone basically spamming saying, hey, I'm selling like 2v2, what's called carries, and just messaged me about it. So I messaged that guy and I was like, hey, teach me how to do it. I'll work for you. Right. I just want to know how to do this, know what the process is. And now, like thinking about myself now, I can go, oh, okay, you basically just get paid through PayPal. It's not really complex or anything. But for me being like a 14-year-old, 15 to like 18-year-old kid with no like outside world experience, the idea of getting paid to play a video game was like really hard to wrap my head around. And so he told me this. We got on Skype calls. He was from Australia and became like a good friend of mine at the time. And I started doing these carries and stuff. And then he made me like a little pamphlet thing. And I've got that on my LinkedIn actually still. And I used that money to pay for rent. And I was making enough money to pay for rent and all that stuff at like an apartment. And I was just working like 12 hours a day. I would spam across like 4 different World of Warcraft accounts, which, it's not looked at very fondly from Blizzard, but I did that, and I would just spam in the chats, and then someone would message me. I would send them a big message about how they can pay me and how we can start working. And this was probably the first time that I dipped my toe in consulting. And it's cool. They say like Steve Jobs has a quote that says like, you can't connect the dots looking forward, only backwards, right? So I see now that this was my first experience with consulting, customer service, and also programming, because one thing that I was doing in World of Warcraft to switch between these accounts is I was starting to become technically savvy at that point, be able to switch and do all that stuff, but also macros. So I would write actually key bindings, and I would spam out messages using macros. And so that's how that kind of developed. And I did that for a while, and then it kind of dried up because, Blizzard, they kind of ruined it, to be honest. They started introducing buy gold using your credit card, and so now like my ability to do that was a little bit more tricky. And I just was not ready to like adapt to it. And at that point, it was like I kind of ran the full candle out. And so I ended up getting a job at fast food actually, and so I was working at a fast food restaurant for like 8 months. And the whole time I hated it. It was like awful. I remember calling my parents like the first day that I was working there and being like, I hate this so much that I'm doing this. I was just running my own business. What am I doing here? But I did that, and that's where I started to see like even in that environment, I'll really try to get better at the stuff that I was doing. And I found like enjoyment actually in like some of the more trivial things. Like when we would see a car come into the parking lot, I would start going into efficiency mode and being like, okay, there's a car there. Let me get like some cups ready. Let me start like calling out to the kitchen. Like I would just, and then when they would order the drinks, I would start doing it. And the movements were very methodical, and I got better at those movements over and over again. And that was also like a precursor to the type of way that I operate now, finding like little efficiencies in places. From there, I went to Portland, actually, Portland, Oregon, where eventually Serverless Guru was founded, but it took a little bit longer. So I went to there, I started doing data entry. And I was now typing faster from the World of Warcraft days. So I started to really get into that whole tech savvy part. And I did that for a while. I went back to school. I started going to a community college, and then I ended up moving back to Texas. And I was there, I was doing, community college in Texas. And I ended up going like, okay, I'm done with this. Like I'm going back to Portland. And how this kicked off is that I knew I wanted to go back, but I didn't really have a strong reason to do it. And then I saw a YouTube video actually where the guy was talking about a code school and immediately that clicked to me. I only needed I was already starting to take like some Android classes through Udemy at that point. And I was going like heavy Java. I didn't even know how HTML worked at that point, but I was doing Java, but I didn't know how does Java even connect to anything else, And so I watched that video. He says code school. Immediately I connect that. If I go to code school, I'll get a job at Google. And like, that's a way that I can just jump way ahead. And so that was my thing from the beginning. Like after I saw that video, I went outside. First off, I emailed them, and I went outside, called my mom, and I was like, I'm going to go work at Facebook or Google doing this, And it was like very early on, I had no skills to be able to do that. And also a little bit delusional, which is, just like a recurring theme. And so I went to code school. That's where I ended up meeting you, Josh, through Stormy, your partner, and then did the code school thing. And I was doing like Udemy courses. I was doing full-time college on the weekend for programming. And I was also still working data entry on the weekend as well. So it was like super jam-packed schedule there. And also listening to like inspiration and motivation on the train, getting super hyped up, and then it got to a point in the later stages of the code school where I did the entire week of the program on like Saturday or Sunday. And then I would show up to code school on Monday, and it was like a full Monday through Friday code school. And I would just work on whatever I wanted to work on because I already did the course at that point. And then I started getting interested from one of the people that was there into AWS because the universe kind of aligned on this. And one of the people that was in the code school with me named Clifford, his brother was an AWS cloud engineer. And so I was immediately like, oh, what does that mean, right? What does this mean, cloud engineer? And I looked up the salaries for it, and I saw it was like 6 figures, and I was like, great, let's do that. And so from there, I met with him, got some more info about it, and then learned about AWS certifications. And so then we started a study group inside of the code school. And then one of the first videos that Ryan Kroonenberg from A Cloud Guru said was serverless is the future, right? And so that's really where this all kicked off, because the second I heard serverless is the future, here I am, I'm trying to like make a stamp, on the world. I'm looking for like my ticket into like the faster track of stuff. And so the second I heard that, I was like, okay, let's figure out what that means. And I learned about like Alexa development, and I ended up building an Alexa skill, which allowed for Portland train arrivals. So you'd basically ask Alexa like, hey, when is the Green Line train coming to City Center? And it would tell you like 5 minutes away or something, right? And so I built that out, and that was super cool. And I was using like Lambda, serverless, AWS. And then from there, this was really, really early days. This was like mid 2017. So a lot of the stuff that we have now didn't exist then, including something like a comparable application now is Dynobase, if y'all are familiar with that, and the founder on Twitter. So I love what he's done with it, about making like this hosted UI of DynamoDB and making that process way easier. So that's what the startup that I tried to do out of code school was in mid 2017. I didn't have the knowledge or the skill set to actually pull the thing off, but I did try, and I worked really hard to understand like cognito authentication flows and all this stuff back when there wasn't really a lot of documentation around it. And then through that process of doing this, I matched like 80% of a job description for Nike for the innovation engineering department. And I was classified as a senior application developer at that point, which was very early on. But eventually I was able to catch up, with the people there and do well at it. And Nike was like a dream come true. It was a standing whiteboard desk at a huge company at the world headquarters. I had like brand new Mac equipment, Apple equipment, and I was like surrounded by peers that were like off the charts. Like they had 5 iOS apps are like #1 in the store and like all these things. And so I did that. And then we built out all this cool machine learning stuff. And I built like a chat bot, and all of it was serverless. All of it was like, the back end stuff supporting machine learning. As the saying goes or whatever, it's like in a machine learning application, like 5% or less is machine learning. And the rest of it is just normal development stuff. And so I helped with all those normal development things, and somebody else handled the machine learning. And from there, I started to branch out, and I talked to Portland Community College about creating a chatbot. And already I had thought about this prior to getting the job at Nike around doing something like serverless consulting or I basically told my grandpa, I was like, I want to start a business. And this was like mid 2017, but I didn't quite know what I wanted to do. I just knew that, if I could get really good at AWS, then people would pay me for that. And that supported my long-term goal of control of my time. Yeah, control of my time. I wanted to be able to control what I did on a daily basis. And I wanted to do it from the location that I wanted to do it. And so I didn't know what the business that would support that. But going back to the story, talked to PCC, they approved me doing a chatbot with serverless, all these things for a job fair, build all that out, do the machine learning side of that as well. And then it never fully got a release, but it was a cool product that was built. And it was my first customer, even though they didn't pay me. And so from there, I was like, okay, this is like a legit thing that I can do. And I swear, probably like a week later, I got a message on LinkedIn from one of the first serverless consulting companies around. And they said, hey, Ryan, we'd love for you to join our serverless consulting company. And I was like, wow, that's like exactly what I wanted to do. And I started to get I was about 8 months in at Nike, and we had built everything. And so the thoughts started to go around in my head of like, am I just going to be maintaining this stuff, or will I be building new things? And I was like, I'm not ready to just like maintain stuff and just like have a good job. Like I want to push it. And so I jumped ship, no extra pay, anything else. And then I do the startup, and I immediately step into this new role of like jumping back into the ocean, which is, Ryan is the developer coach of, developers that I believe they had worked at Microsoft for like 15 years. And then I'm like, 1 year, 1 year and a half into my career, teaching them about like serverless framework, serverless development, amplify all these different technologies. From there, I started to really get like a more of a concrete understanding of like a consulting company is a real thing that I can do. And there was just some gaps that I had to fill. So I get through that. I finally come to that decision point of starting it. Not without the rocky roads, obviously, in all businesses, but what it ended up turning into is that late 2018, Serverless Guru becomes a thing. It's just me at that point. Soon after, I think probably around like December, we met, Josh.
I think so.
Yeah. And so we met at a party. And then I think we started talking about like Gary Vee and like LinkedIn marketing and all that stuff. And you're like, I do marketing. I was like, great, let's do this, And so we started doing that, very casually talking. And then just like slowly different people reached out. Once the business was a thing, then everyone was like, oh, I'm interested in that. And we're trying to do something around like cloud development. Maybe you can help us. And so one by one, just started adding projects, getting overwhelmed with it, doing the whole like 12 hours a day type of thing and working the weekends, until it got to the point where it's like, okay, I've got 3 projects. I'm going to lose my mind. So I need to add someone in. And so then I just slowly tried that with different people, eventually found like a fit. And then just like slowly started scaling it out through 2019. we hit some rocky roads again around like late 2019, and we were probably around like 3 people, 4 people in the company, 5 people. And then or so that was late. Yeah, 2019. And then around like the end of 2019, we got like a break, and that break was our first enterprise client. And from there, it was basically like, I told the person I was talking to on the phone, when they offered the opportunity, they said, "Do you want this?" And I said, "This is the Super Bowl for us. Like this is the thing. Like we've been working since the very beginning for this one moment in time to basically deliver this project to this client, because it was very clear that if we did that successfully and we proved that we are the best at doing this, then it's, what I mean? At that point, there's no doubt anymore about like, and then from there we can start slowly, growing and scaling. So we get that project. That's actually one of our longest running clients now. We've been working with them for quite a while. Worked with them throughout the entire pandemic, 2020, first half, obviously we're in 2021, it's still a thing, but the first half of the pandemic. And then around like late 2020, after, the economy had came back a little bit, and people were starting to be a little bit more risk on, we got our second enterprise client, and largely based on the work that we had done for the first enterprise client. And then by like early 2021, if I have all my dates correct, we were now scaling out to, 5 people on a project, 4 people on a project, 3 people on a project. And we went from like late 2019 of having like 4 people to now currently we have probably like 23 people or something. And we're still growing. And so, that's the full journey. So, now I can just reference back to this if anybody ever asks me this question again.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Thank you so much for going into detail, because I don't think we really have like your full story documented, and it's always interesting. Like for me, like I definitely know a good deal of it. Even this time there was stuff that I didn't particularly know, and I think it's always great to understand like, where people come from, as well as like what they're working on now, which you were talking about, and that sort of thing. And I think, I'm also really excited for the show, not only to have that get to be able to hear this, but also because, we were able to reach out to our audience and get them to share with us lots of questions. And I'll also, preface here, if you haven't sent in your question, you can send in your question via, view like the Q&A box. So if something pops up, we definitely have Ryan here to sort of, talk to us candidly, which is really fantastic. So I'd love to share with you the first question that we have from the audience.
Yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. So what was it? This is like really interesting. I think you'll have an interesting perspective on this one. Is it from Rich Buggy from Twitter? How do we get mainstream developers into serverless?
So I think there's something that's like, I'll draw a parallel to blockchain development, and I'll try not to lose my train of thought about why I'm doing that.
I'll rein you in if needed.
Yeah, okay. So with blockchain development, I struggle with this as well, which is how does my skill apply to this new field? And is everything new, or is it partially the same? And like, what is the difference there? And I feel like we probably have a similar thing happening with serverless as well, which is how does a regular Node.js developer or something transition to serverless? Or how does someone that's working the cloud, but with virtual machines, or even outside of like the current AWS cloud providers, all that stuff, how do they transition to something like serverless? And do their skills actually align? And do they not? And the answer to that is like they do align, and even to the blockchain side, right? At the end of the day, a lot of the stuff that we're still doing is functions, writing code. There's like services that we're using, API integrations, and vocabulary, and it's just jargon. And so if you spend enough time just looking at the jargon, looking at the tutorials, all that stuff, everything will click together about your existing knowledge to your new knowledge. And I think that the easier that we make that bridge, the better we're going to be able to get like people, mainstream people into like serverless. And so it's all a matter of, if you're an individual contributor, what could you do to potentially help, bridge that gap for people? And you could make tutorials through blog articles have been really successful, or online courses. And the thing that I really want to flag is that a lot of times when I hear about like articles and things, a lot of times it's flagged, oh, somebody already wrote something about that. I think part of the reason why I did that long intro is that everything that you've had happen in your entire life makes your perspective unique. And because of that unique perspective, you're going to communicate to someone that's out there in a way that will click with them that everything else existing won't click. And so even though there are a lot of articles about doing certain things, I feel like I want to encourage everyone that's listening to write those articles, to engage with the community, because your unique perspective is going to actually have a huge impact, and your writing style and the way that you talk and all those things will actually have a huge difference to people. So
No, definitely. And what is it, that perspective, especially if this is coming from someone who like also sees the value in serverless and is working with it potentially. I think there's tons of value definitely in the projects that we've worked with when inside these large companies, sometimes they have hundreds or thousands of employees. If they have like they call them like internal champions, or just someone who's willing to say like, no, I think serverless is the best choice for our organization, and be able to like demonstrate it with like the use case, or having a POC or having something just to show that like this is helping us solve our problem. Because what is it? What is it? I listened to it. I was at a conference once, and there's like this like well-known futurist there, and he sort of like he puts up a slide, and it's just like this human robot sitting in a chair, and he's like, this is what people think the future is like. They think it's like super high tech, and it's kind of unsettling because it's familiar but also unknown. And like with the robot in the chair, there's also like a level of like, is that my chair? Is the robot sitting in the place that I used to be sitting? Is it replacing me? So there is that inherent fear, I think, whenever we're talking about future technology. And that's a certain kind of fear that I think we do and have seen in certain organizations. However, he was like, this is actually what the future is going to look like. And he goes to the next slide, it's just a hammer. He's like, the future is just tools. There's going to be new tools for us to utilize, and we're at the end of the day going to be the ones to use the tools. So I bring this up to, I think, highlight that there's problems that real organizations and real people around the world are facing, and serverless is simply another tool that can help us fix those problems. But same thing with blockchain. And so so if you know how to use that and implement it, then you'll actually find that for some problems it fixes it even faster than the legacy solution or the typical way of doing things. So I think you bring up a good point, and I think a great way to communicate that is by sharing perspective. We each have individual perspective that is going to be essential for the adoption of serverless technologies, regardless of where you're at.
yeah, totally agree. Yeah, the idea that it's just a hammer, I think that's a really good analogy. Because a lot of times it's like that was the same problem I was running into with the blockchain thing, was like, how does my knowledge of all these things is just completely out the window? Like it has no impact at all. Like, am I starting from scratch as well? Or do my skills actually transition at all? And that's the thing, is that how many people are out there communicating that gap, right? You're coming from this perspective and you see all this jargon about like, decentralized network, constellation network, and like these tokens, and then they're interacting and there's nodes and they're optimizing based on machine learning, and how much is buzzwords, how much is real, how much is not, and then figuring out that mix, and then from there going, okay, with my current understanding, I can start matching the vocabulary together until eventually I have like a full picture. And then that's like, I think when you get like this like wave of like reassurance that like you actually can make that transition, and it's actually not that big of a thing. And if I'm struggling to find that information, I know for a fact everyone probably is struggling with that. And so I think that there needs to be a lot of those type of materials happening. And also, this is a really key thing, is that it's not just it doesn't just need to be from the people that have the most experience. It actually needs to be from the people that have the least amount of experience that are transitioning, because their perspective in transitioning is going to be the closest to what other people are experiencing than mine would. Because for me, I've been doing this for 3 or 4 whatever years, and it's hard for me to put myself in Ryan Jones in mid 2017 and then try to imagine what it was like for me to learn these things. But for somebody that's transitioning, if they're documenting that entire process, if they're sharing that, a lot of times that can be very intimidating, because maybe I get something wrong, but at the same time, you really are communicating in a way that is, very tangible.
I definitely agree with that. So I think part of the answer, I think, is to like if you do have an experience of how you learn to move into serverless, or when you're like, oh, this is the moment that I'm really seeing the value. Like being able to document that and being able to share that like earnest experience with other people, I think that's very powerful. And I think, like personally, I just had like a moment of experience with that, with like the blockchain, and really understanding just how beneficial it can be, where it's just like, just finding out like operationally, it's actually easier to send like international payments and do like invoice operational processing using like a blockchain based payment system rather than like a traditional legacy finance system. Like, you can say that, and it seems like, okay, it's very abstract, but what does it matter? But when you actually need to like pay someone and it happens like instantaneously, and you have that human to human connection of like, this was like a net positive to our relationship and to our business together. It's just like, oh, no brainer. This is the better solution. And I think we see that with serverless, when it's like, we were able to launch this project in a third of the time. Some of the wildest use cases are the ones that get, or the experiences get brought up, because they are just so mind blowing, and that sort of thing. And it's just like, wow, this is clearly highly valuable. So that's always fun to be able to promote those and to share that experience with others.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good segue into the second question.
No, I think
Honestly,
so
yeah,
too, because I think there's always like, what is it? People always love to only talk about like their successes, and I think that's also like it's always like a critique of like, I don't know, like in like the investment world, like the businesses that do really well, there's like survivor bias of like thinking that, because this one person did well, they think the whole process is very successful, but maybe they're just an outlier. And so I think this question touches on this from Zach Neubauer, I believe, from Twitter. He's curious how serverless stacks up cost wise compared to dedicated servers. I think this is a question that people will be very quick to say like, serverless is great because you only pay for what you use, so you're going to have a lower bill. Like, it's just like cost efficiency. That's like the most valuable thing. How do you respond to that?
yeah. So it's like it's a multi-layered question that often only stays on the surface. I'll preference it that way. And so when we think about cost, a lot of times we think about raw compute cost. How much does it cost when this Lambda function runs? And depending on what you're actually trying to accomplish with this serverless architecture, it might cost more, right? And so then at the surface level, you go, okay, it costs more. Now I have my argument to not use serverless. But when we go a couple layers deeper and we start thinking about what is the core cost of a business building applications in 2021, it's the software developers. It's the engineering time, right? And so when we think about ways to save cost, it should be around lowering as somebody that I worked with recently or in the past, even at Serverless Guru, Gary would say, it's about Gary Jennings, it's about lowering the feedback loop, right? And so you want that feedback loop to be as fast as possible, because the less time that the developers spend debugging, the less time that operations spends trying to increase the database count so that it's not like maxing out the database, the less of all of those different aspects and the smoother that the whole system starts running, that's where those real cost savings come in, because then we can redirect all that engineering time towards something else. And when we think about it from a macro business perspective, what's actually making money is the product. And so the more time that we spend investing into those engineering hours that we're saving into building out new product features, the more potential money that the business is making and the more impact that the developers on a day-to-day basis feel like they're having. Because I know when I run into a bug and I'm sitting there spending 2 hours trying to debug it because there's like some weird nested loop thing, maybe it's not in my code, right? And I'm trying to figure out what the heck is going on. That doesn't make me feel very good when it's just like a small little, one line change. And all those other 2 hours could have been spent on something creative and et cetera, right? And so like, are we at the point where, application code is being, done at that level? No, but a lot of people are still focused on the infrastructure in a way that in a serverless world, we're not doing. And so kind of say what that means, to create serverless architectures now in the way that is kind of a first-class citizen, which is infrastructure as code. You have basically these recipes, these blueprints for the thing that you're going to create. I'm going to create a REST API. Okay, I've got this REST API blueprint, and you can do that with other stuff, but it's almost like a add-on later, right? And so it wasn't built for the purpose of building these things. It just kind of works. And so once we start getting into the serverless realm, we start removing a lot of the overhead that we had previously with, let's say, virtual machines, containers, and we start moving into something where we say, you know what matters to me, what matters to the business is building a good product, but running good servers, right? The only thing that matters there is, are they performant and do they work? Maybe there's like a couple other aspects, but really that's it, right? Is the customer having a good experience using our APIs? And maybe behind that API, it's serverless, so it's a Lambda function and it's being managed by AWS. Maybe behind it is a manually spun up thing, or even an automated spun up cloud virtual machine that doesn't scale properly. Or if it does scale, there's been tons and tons of engineering hours, which again is the highest cost in the whole equation. And so when we take that level of like, what matters to the customer, which is actually what the business is completely about, is about the customer experience, then running a good server or making a good server is actually one of the last priorities that we have, even though that's a huge field of people that are doing that currently. And to that end, I would say, you know, just to wrap that entire thing up, if we talk at the service level or the surface level, it's about the cost of compute, right? Cost of storage, right? But then we go a couple layers deeper. How much time does it take for engineers to be able to build those things, interact with those things, maintain those things? And then what is that total cost of all of that together, right? So you take the accumulation of all those different aspects. Serverless is way, 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 way cheaper than doing things in the more, you know, cloud virtual machine, and oftentimes something like Kubernetes with containers, all that stuff. So time to market, automation, overhead, like overhead goes down, automation goes up, time to market goes is much faster, and all of those are benefits that we get, and all of those have a real monetary value that we can associate with it. If somebody was willing to sit down and really do some very deep math about how long does it take for a new feature to be released, how much does that feature potentially give in new revenue, and start actually calculating. So it takes developers 2 weeks to do it. They're paid at X hourly rate. And if you were doing that calculation and you compared it to serverless, it's a very clear equation, and serverless wins that out, you know, all day long. So
I think so. I think that's a great, I think a great quote from Gary, and I think a great way to think about it, like lowering the feedback loop. I think some of the most valuable things that I think I've seen us able to accomplish, and just like in business in general, is like when you can lower the feedback loop, or when you can really shorten the amount of time in order to get a result, like that at a base level of like operational excellence, that process efficiency, it's hard to really find a way to replicate that. And I also think with humans, there's like a little cognitive bias for us to really be able to recognize that. Like I think there is some endowment effect of, you know, I've spent this many hours trying to fix this problem. I know I'm valuable, clearly. Our skills are valuable. Therefore, this is a valuable spend of my time. But there could be a reality where, you know, you didn't have to spend 2 hours. It actually only took you 10 minutes or no time at all, because we're just going to remove that process. And now you have more time to do something that's even more valuable. There's like a higher valuable variable that you have the ability to contribute to. So I think that's like a very interesting thing. Like I think about, what is it? Like my grandfather worked and troubleshooted, like debug like the first computers for the Air Force. And he told me, you know, back in the day, if something was going wrong, you had like a plate and you like plugged it in and it like came out a report and you had to read the report. And then it's like, oh, okay, this is where the bug is. And, you know, eventually, you know, you didn't have to go up to your computer, put in like a hard chip, and then read a report and then debug it that way. You know, we can do it via the console. We can do it in any infinitesimally easier ways now. And like, what is it? It's not like because of that, we're able to do things much faster. We no longer have to wait for like a very dedicated specialist to figure that out. And then what did he end up doing? He ended up teaching many people how to like work on the hardware, develop software for Cisco systems. So it's like there is, I think, this fear of like, you know, the robot's going to replace our jobs. Like if they figure out how we don't need like real infrastructure or hardware infrastructure anymore, like what will I do? Your expertise will still be valued and still be valuable, because now you can actually do twice as much, and because you're so skilled, you can contribute more and add more value to the business, to the creativity process, and that sort of thing. So I think it's something that people don't need to be as afraid of.
Yeah, and I just want to touch on that too, because that's like I gave a talk in Portland, Oregon, back in I think like 2019, and I believe that I was introduced as like This is Ryan talking about serverless and hopefully not about how it's going to take everyone's job away or something, right? And it was like a joke, but it was also like partially like a true thing that everyone was feeling, right? And I feel like people still feel those feelings today. And you have blockchain come in, Web 3.0, all Web 2.0 is going out the window. Oh, what about me? You know what I mean? So I feel like we're all in that spot constantly. The field that we've chosen, unfortunately, is not static, and it's nowhere near static, and it's increasing and changing on a daily basis. And it's our job as professionals to be on that front line, understanding the new things that are coming out, and then use the skills and the knowledge that we've acquired to be able to make those transitions. And I would say, like one flag there is like, if your company is familiar with servers and you only have two people and you already have something released and you don't have a lot of customers, it may not make sense to switch to serverless because the cost, like the value that you'll get out of that, it doesn't outweigh the cost. But if you're a larger company, you have 10 people, you have 20 people, you have hundreds, you have thousands, you're running a much bigger thing with millions of customers, then that equation is very, very easy. And I just want to make that flag because sometimes I've seen companies try to make that transition without having something that's like a real product, and they end up almost just spinning their wheels and never really getting something out. And so in that situation, this is also where I'll flag back to like, the Serverless Guru website, for instance, is built with Webflow, right? And so for those who don't know, Webflow is like almost like a drag and drop with like where you can customize some HTML and all those things, but it makes CSS easy and HTML easy. And, and it's not that we're not capable of writing HTML and CSS. We definitely are capable of doing it, but is it a good time investment, right? Is making the marketing site from scratch the best use of time? And in my opinion, it's not. And so then I looked for tools that allowed me to get the 99% of what I wanted. And then that was Webflow. And then around like edge cases, like form submissions, doing some extra automation. Yeah, that took us a little bit of extra coding to make that work. But each one of those sites or each one of those pages, we can now spin up new pages very easily and in like record time, right? And release it and do all those things. And so it all depends on the use case there. Would I use Webflow for a more complex application involving serverless? Absolutely not. Would I use it for a marketing site that I just need to have spun up quickly and be able to make it so that almost everyone in the organization can make changes to this and see those reflected really quickly? Absolutely. Because what matters most is like having an idea and then seeing it go from idea to reality in the shortest amount of time, the shortest feedback loop. And so I just wanted to add those two flags because serverless makes sense in almost all categories, but it also depends on the context of where you are in that total business journey, just to kind of make that a little bit clearer.
Completely. And I think you demonstrated a good example, which is like, if you're a business, if you're a situation where you have multiple servers and very few clients, or have yet to really hit critical mass there, like I think there's an argument for like, does the business have true like product market fit? And like, if you don't know that if you don't know that for sure, then you shouldn't be investing in just infrastructure costs in general or capital or cost to make the process more efficient. I think by the definition, like, definitely like like Fortune 100 plus companies, like by definition, they have product market fit and they've demonstrated it for many, many years. So I think it's an easier sell and choice for them to be able to say, let's make our process more efficient because we know our process already works. So if you know that, then, I think I've always seen serverless like have a role in like a very defined use case, like you were saying. But if that use case isn't yet formed, it's like it's a potential risk, but I wouldn't say it's a risk associated with serverless itself. It's more of like a risk associated with the product, with the product market fit risk, which is just like a general business risk. And in that case, like yes, serverless may be costing you more in those situations, but literally anything you're doing in that situation is actually probably costing you money.
Yeah. There's actually something that made me think about. For a while when I was in Portland, I was at an incubator at the WeWork Labs, and I was around a whole bunch of other founders and people that were starting businesses and stuff. And I learned about a way of building things, which was really groundbreaking, honestly. And I still don't do it today, but I know that it's probably the way that I should be doing it. Is what they did is they just made a slideshow. And so a lot of times we like to think that we need this full thing to be able to show out to the market. They just made a slideshow and then they went to people and they just asked them, does this make sense for like what a website might look like? We're thinking about doing this type of thing. And then they just took that feedback, they modified the slideshow. You know how fast it took them to make those new features, right? Hours, right? Like versus like days or weeks if they were building a real product that whole time. And so they did that, and then they did a drag and drop UI type of solution, and they've been using that since then. But they're able to sit down and update that drag and drop solution, and that whole time they're establishing their product market fit, and they're adjusting it like on such a time scale. It's just crazy. They went from a V1 to a V2 to like V3. All I think they were at like V10 or something last time that I was talking to them. And those were like within week. Those like weeks per version, right? And their V1 versus their V10 just like 10 weeks later was like way different. And they would sit down with people, they would watch their reaction as they're using the UI. And if they seemed like they're confused by something, they would like write that down. They'd get that feedback, and then they would just update it with the drag and drop thing. And then their long term for it is once they have like an established thing that's fully working, then they're going to build an actual product out of it. And that's probably where they would start evaluating using serverless. And so that level of thinking is just like crazy. I've never met another team of people that were doing that, but they're a Portland company that allows for getting fresh food from different farms there, from local farms. And they're crushing it. So yeah.
That is very interesting, and I think like definitely from like a startup perspective, that certainly is what you wanna do. Even if you are have an idea for an application and like you have an idea how to build it out without any users or any like real usage context, like even if you're like, oh, I can easily spin up some stuff with Lambda and DynamoDB and API Gateway, like you should wait until you have like someone who's like eager to use the thing that you're wanting, or even like if you don't have any tentative yeses yet, then you probably shouldn't be building anything. You need to really see if there's desire and like pull for the product or for the idea. Even within like your company too. I've been inside organizations, and it's like if everyone is already saying no, we're not doing this, or like we're tabling it until the next quarter review or something. Sometimes what is it? Someone just doesn't want to own the project, or maybe they don't have budget and like they actually do need to table it. But like being able to present your idea in an effective way when you need to, that is important. And sometimes it's better not to just spend all the time building something just so you have to rewrite it later.
Absolutely.
All right. Now, what is it? I think so. One thing else I also wanna ask you as we're pressing up against time in a little bit is get your thoughts around like how like the serverless industry like in general, like and Benoit from Twitter also asked a question very similar to this, and I think I can just use his, which is, where do you see serverless in 5 to 10 years from now? Like, how do you think it's going to develop in the context of all you're seeing? Is blockchain the serverless killer? Headline, mediums, publish. Does this title even make sense? Who knows? But it'll probably get a lot of clicks.
Yeah, one thing that I've been trying to wrap my head around with the blockchain serverless side and how that fits in, and because we can say very confidently that blockchain development, and even having Nader Dabit on the podcast previously and him talking about it, we're 10 years, we're a decade away from this being like a common thing that's happening. Like we're not going to wake up tomorrow and Web 3.0 is here and everything is blockchain. No, like it's a very, very slow process, and it needs a ton of maturity to be honest. And so we can say that about blockchain. It's coming for sure, but it's going to take a bit to have like mass adoption. For serverless, we've gone through that process from probably like 2017, because I know that Lambda came out, and then API Gateway wasn't a thing, and then now we have like AppSync, and we have EventBridge, and we have all these other services that have increased the maturity of what it means to build serverless applications. And so in 2021 now, it feels like we have enough tools to pretty much accomplish anything. And so I think what that means is that now we're in that kind of like mainstream adoption, where obviously we're at the early stages of mainstream adoption, but now most people are aware that it exists, and it's at least been talked about, or maybe like a pin on a board somewhere to revisit in like a year from now. And so I think what's going to end up happening is that we're going to see this model of people moving away from managing their own things to this fully managed paradigm. And that's also something that's relevant with blockchain stuff as well. A lot of the things that end up happening in that space, it's a lot of fully managed things where you can use this service and it'll build out this network for you and it'll give you this token that you can use within the network. And you don't have to spin up all those things yourself, all the servers, all those things, right? And so like how those servers are being configured and how all those things are working together, I think there'll be some, happy bridge between all the serverless stuff that's happening and that blockchain future state. I have seen a lot of stuff in the blockchain community, and I can't say I've seen a lot of stuff. I've seen some stuff where there's a lot of like JVM usage, Java, Scala, all those things, and more like traditional virtual machines, things like that. So in those cases, there still is, those like, a little bit of that overhead. And I don't know how some of those companies that are running their own networks will compete with someone like Amazon. It feels like Amazon might, come in and like eat the lunch of some of these people or buy them to run it off of the AWS side. But what I can say is that I believe that we're in the early stages of mainstream adoption and that more and more companies are going to start prioritizing reducing all of these manual processes to kill inefficiencies, to spend more time focused on their product. And that was always a thing that people wanted to do from the very beginning, but we didn't really have the tools. Now we actually have the tools and they exist. And so now it's just a matter, before it was a matter of exposure, right? Like education of this actually being a thing that you can do. Now I feel like we've done that, to a large degree. And so that's where the whole thing around some conversations have happened. And I think that through this year into like 2022, I think more of these large companies are starting to start getting on board. I think fresh applications are going to be built a lot more priority towards serverless from the beginning. And I think that it's just, it's upward growth. I talked to the CEO of Commandeer. And so I talked to him and he basically said that he imagined serverless being a hockey stick, right? So we have hockey stick type growth, 1,000% growth is basically, I believe that was his exact quote from that podcast episode. And so I think that was like far exceeding how I was thinking about it, but I think that is where we're headed. And so all the skills and knowledge that you can gain right now to understand this space and understand things like the usage of EventBridge, the usage of AppSync, API Gateway, Lambda, how you build CloudWatch things, how you build secure cloud applications, and just getting hands-on practical experience, right? That's going to serve really well in the future. And I don't see any of these things going away. I just see them expanding and becoming more mature. And then abstractions being built up over the top of them. The same thing that's happened with cloud virtual machines to containers to cloud functions. You have enough maturity that an abstraction is created, enough maturity, abstraction is created, and of course, enough maturity, abstraction is created. And so we're in that process right now, but understanding how that layer below that abstraction operates is always going to be a useful thing to have, so that it's much easier for you to transition to whatever that new state is, if that makes sense.
I think that definitely makes sense. And so, to sort of summarize, like, in your opinion, you're seeing that, like, like we will see some form of like mass serverless adoption or mainstream serverless adoption. And there's more room for the industry really, really to grow, and just sort of the raw amount of people who are looking to utilize serverless technologies. And I think you also brought up an interesting point, which was, there's all these different services and these skills, whether it's like Lambda API Gateway, AppSync, that are going to have to, like, there'll be more maturity even from where they are right now. So, in the sense that, like, are these technologies, like, are they in their final stages? Are they going to be iterated and developed more upon? For someone or an organization, like, trying to make the decision for their plan, like, either as like an engineer, should I learn serverless? Like, is it too late? Is it too late to either start considering serverless, or do I need to wait for sort of like the next thing, this next abstraction, or is there still value from learning these technologies right now?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's definitely would say you're not too late. And if anything, you'll just move faster than the early stages of it. Because I tried to find a serverless developer job back in like mid 2017. That wasn't a job title, right? There was no like I searched for serverless developer. I try to find all those things. Now I get hit with recruiters all the time now that have senior serverless developer, senior AWS cloud developer with like Lambda and API Gateway and AppSync and all this stuff. And so that's how I like am partially measuring like the mainstream adoption side is, do I have random tech recruiters that probably aren't aware of the space completely that are messaging me with asking to do like Lambda and all the stuff that, you know what I mean? So I feel like that hasn't happened until probably like a couple months ago. And it's seeming like it's increasing really dramatically. So I think exponential growth is probably close to accurate, and the maturity of all these services. Yeah.
Thank you for the perspective. I think it's interesting to like think about the like the mainstream adoption of like serverless based on like how many like LinkedIn requests you're getting from people being like hey, do you want to help me out with this position or that sort of thing? I need serverless engineers. Because I definitely agree, several years ago that was like not a thing. Like you couldn't find any, like there are no recruiters really asking for serverless engineers, and there is no like job postings about it. But now you can go on LinkedIn. It's like, serverless engineer, serverless developer that aren't just like our job posts and like the four other cloud consulting companies in the world that exist or something. So I think that's really interesting. And you know, I guess, what is it? The day like my grandmother starts talking about serverless, then I'll know it's time to jump industries. But I don't have a tech savvy grandmother, either of them. I would say so. I feel okay saying that, even if they're listening, they won't be offended. But once that happens, then we know, to switch industries potentially. But no, I think that's a really good point that you make.
Yeah, I think something that's like kind of interesting is like, where is the industry headed maybe outside of purely serverless? I'm really fascinated by application code automation. And so I think that our ability to stitch together very complex application logic that we know for a fact won't have bugs in it while we're developing it, right? Like if I can write a async JavaScript, functional map or something over an array, and I know that this thing is being like, I type it, I know it's going to generate it, or there's some type of interface thing that makes sense to the developer. I think that that's going to be very huge, because if it's generic purpose and it allows for developers to write this stuff faster, I think there's going to be a market for that, because ultimately it's about speed and it's about being able to build things. And so even without code, right? So like things like service proxies, if y'all are familiar with the audience with serverless, and the ability of, let's say, like doing a service proxy with a REST API, where instead of having a Lambda function behind API gateway, we go straight from the API gateway straight to the actual service. And that allows us to build much more robust applications and actually reduce the code to zero. And so by doing that, we're saving all this other time. But the process to actually create those things is actually more difficult. And I think that that's probably going to be that abstraction layer that happens in the future, is around simplifying the building of these complex architectures into something that's still manageable, that doesn't turn into a black box, but does simplify the paths. Because right now, if you go to like Lambda console and you look at all the different things that you can do, there's like so much stuff. There's all these screens, tabs, there's extensions, there's layers, there's like, the timeouts, the memory, like what is the optimal point of all these things? Knowing that stuff, implementing those things, and knowing the nuances of all that is complex. And so I think that all of these are building blocks, and we need that foundational building blocks to be able to build anything we want based on the use case. But then we need to have abstractions over the top of that to make that process simpler and easier, because at the end of the day, building a really good REST API doesn't actually matter to the consumer if they're having a good experience if it's performant on the front end and they're able to use the application to do what they need to do. That's actually a good customer experience. So like, is Lambda the end state? Is API Gateway the end state? Are these fully managed services that currently exist the end state? Potentially not. Are they the foundational pieces underneath whatever comes next? I think so. And there may be a world where there's the abstractions that exist, and there's also the low level things that exist. And there might be a bridge between those things. And so understanding how to do serverless development now, today, and then understanding that the abstraction may come in the future, it won't take away your job. You'll still have to do those things as well. So yeah, end of rant there.
I think that's perfect, and I think that's a great ending place right there, because I think we're pressing up against time, and I know, I looked at both of our calendars today, and we both have like plenty left to do, and that sort of thing. And you're 3 hours in the future, which I always find fascinating. So
Yeah.
So no, I definitely want to, give a special thanks to you, Ryan, our founder at Serverless Guru, just for jumping on, telling us about your story, and getting to hear about how you can go from like rubber band bracelets and a tackle box to serverless engineering and serverless development and running a serverless consulting company. So that's always like really interesting and exciting to hear, as well as all your perspective and the answers to these questions. And so thank you so much for listening to Talking Serverless today. And this is your host signing off for the day.